watching Beyond Markets. Welcome. I'm Kenneth Igbomo. Coming up on today's show, we'll continue our series on the conversations leading to Nigeria's 2019 elections. We started off this series by setting a bar for the quality of conversations that we need to have to shape the national discourse as Nigeria's 2019 elections draws closer. On today's show, we'll find out the value proposition of one of the presidential candidates for next year's election. Don't forget, you can always join the conversation on Twitter. Follow me at Kenneth Igbomo. Use the hashtag Beyond Markets and 2019 elections 410. While some say it will be a daunting task for anyone who will be at the helm of affairs in Nigeria after the elections next year, who will be the best person to steer Africa's largest economy to its desired destination beyond 2019? I have with me in studio Obiageli Ezekwesili, the presidential candidate of the Allied Congress Party of Nigeria. She joins me here to share her value proposition for the country. Thank you for your time, Ma.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Very interesting. So I would like to know what your value proposition is for the 180 million Nigerians out there.
I think in one word, it is, or perhaps in one sentence, it is to rally our citizens to build a prosperous nation that is cohesive and stable, and one which offers equality of opportunity to every Nigerian to be the best that they can be. And the reason for this is that we want to enable the productivity and competitiveness of our people and our country.
All right, then I'll get to you later on competitiveness, but I want to talk to you about walking the talk. You know, it's one thing to have this, value proposition. It's another thing to bring it to bear. So I would like to hear your strategies, your tactics, and your techniques, in getting this value proposition from your mind and out there working as Nigerians.
So the first thing that we must do is to halt the decline. Our country has definitely declined in every sense of the word. Number one is life has been cheapened. We're becoming a society that normalizes the debt of our people in ways that are abominable. We have killings around the country, and when people die, there are no consequences. And it's almost as if young ones are growing into a society where they know that no one really cares about life and that it can be taken anytime, anyhow. And there will be absolutely no consequence for such tragedy. So getting the Nigerian life to matter, the primacy, the sanctity, that whole concept of the dignity of the human life, we need to restore it immediately. And that means we're going to focus on everything that enhances our security and safety of the Nigerian person and property. The second thing is that we are going to stop the decline in terms of the quality of human capital that we have in order to build a vibrant economy and society. The fact that we have 13.2 million out-of-school children without access to basic education is a dampener for us. We need to enhance the quality of education and the relevance of education so that we can, through that, and combined with good health care system, build a very world-class human capital base. Because ultimately, as we are in a post-oil era, we must recognize that it is key that our citizens be at the center of our development strategy. The third thing is that we need to have intelligent, capable, competent bureaucracy, because government is key for making the right kinds of policy calls that would incentivize the private sector to drive our economic growth. This is absolutely necessary because when government understands its role as facilitator, as enabler, as the envisioner of the direction, the general direction that society should go, it then frees up every other sector in the country, the private sector as well as civil society, to take a cue from that and to drive their own particular aspects of roles in the society. The fourth part of it is to put the private sector at the center of economic development. You need to remove the barriers that stand in the way of their productivity and their competitiveness. And so coming to terms with the fact that we are a country that wants our engine of growth to be with the private sector means that policy alignment, making sure that basic services that would enable a low-cost competitive environment, ensuring that we have the kinds of institutions and processes that do not drag them down but really enhance them would be key. And then, you know, just understanding that we don't have time, that we every year are adding 3 to 4 million young people into the labor market, of which only 10% of them will find decent jobs. So it means that the jobs and more jobs agenda is right at the heart of anything we're doing with private sector, which therefore means that we as government, together with private sector, would have to identify the diverse sources of growth, sources of economic possibilities that we have, ranging from technology to services, financial services, to agriculture and agribusiness, to even tourism, to construction, housing, to sectors like critical infrastructure, to education. To the whole human capital, as a source of national growth. So those kinds of things where we are looking at sectors where productivity is dormant or productivity is too low, we want to jumpstart the productivity growth. Because what we have as a country is a productivity challenge. It's even in seasons of growth. If you're growing without productivity acceleration, then what happens is that you are doing so much for so little. And we know the barriers that lead to such a situation. We have to remove them through policy. And finally, just knowing how to manage our diversity better.
Okay.
We want to run a nation where basically you are not injuring your prospects by getting everybody into a race to the bottom. In managing our diversity, we have to manage it in the kind of way that people know that there is equality of opportunity, not necessarily equality of outcomes, but in terms of opportunity. And part of the greatest opportunity is to give people the opportunity for education and training, and those things that enhance their capacity to take advantage of what is available to everybody equally. So managing our diversity means that we would look at this whole matter of a federal character and begin to look at it as a diversity problem, and a diversity problem can be a diversity opportunity. What we want to be able to do is to manage our diversity in ways that take all of us on a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom, which is what the federal character does these days.
Interesting.
I'm sorry, but I missed out on one key factor.
All right, you can bring it in.
Which is disruptive technologies.
Okay.
That for me is huge. I really love the fact that we're in this fourth industrial revolution. I don't think the winners are yet fully defined, so we still have opportunity to get our young ones, and they are brilliant. There are many of them playing on the sidelines of it, but our kind of administration will take them right to the center of it and enable them to, dare to dream.
Interesting, you've touched on some of the very salient points that I actually wanted to get into, but we'll still see how we'll get more in-depth into some of these conversations, because first I would like to get what your vision is for nationhood. You started off on that tangent already earlier, talking about the managing diversity, knowing the kind of country that we're in with the many hundreds of tribes and ethnicities in here. what are your plans for, what's your vision for
Yes.
the nationhood as the Nigeria of tomorrow?
Yes. So I have a track record already of being someone who looks at the Nigerian, regardless of where they are from, as my fellow human beings, and that I have shared humanity with them. And I love Nigeria so much. I believe in the country. And I believe in the fact that what we need is really for leadership to organize us better. And that if we're well organized by leadership and inspired and persuaded by leadership to be the best that we can be as a people, we can actually be that. If leadership led us in an exemplary way and enabled us through having the right sets of policies and institutions and public investment to complement what the private sector can do, we will be a great nation. So when I look at the process of nation building, I look at it as, a vision for an inclusive society, a society that does not discriminate, that does not discriminate on the basis of what part of the country you're from, what region you're from, what tongue you speak, what belief you have, but looking at every human being in Nigeria as a human resource. The way to get them to going from mere human beings to becoming human resource, as in human capital, is a whole lot of work. And so my approach to nation building is agreeing the destination. The destination is that we want to have a world-class human capital that no matter the least of us cannot even be so weak that they cannot take advantage of opportunities. So if we agreed that, and we say regardless of who you are, we want it to be that any Nigerian that you encounter reflects that ideal that we can become. That will help us to have the conversation around managing our diversity. And so nation building takes off from there. You must have, as a leader, a rallying vision that you invite people to critique, to buy into, to then take ownership of.
We'll hold that thought right now. We'll just go to a quick break. I've been speaking to Obiageli Ezekwesili, the presidential candidate of the Allied Congress Party of Nigeria. We'll continue our conversation after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Beyond Markets. Very interesting conversation we're having here. Still with me in studio is Obiageli Ezekwesili, the presidential candidate of the Allied Congress Party of Nigeria. Moving on now, Obi, I'd like to hear, what your plans are for these three very important things we have here in Nigeria. One is corruption. The other is insecurity, which you've been championing the Bring Back Our Girls campaign since it came up. And then, and then the economy. These three things have been what the current president kind of rode on to get himself in power. I'd like to know what your plans. What are Obi's plans for these three things?
Well, I already spoke about the economy and what should happen with the economy. You need the private sector to drive the economy. You need to take growth from the current levels of less than 3% back to 5-6%, which is not even sufficient growth. We need to diversify the sources of growth. So for you to be able to do that, you need to identify where the opportunities for economic growth are. And so those kinds of sectoral opportunities, identifying them and putting the necessary factors that drive growth behind them. So for example, we know that you need a certain level of investment in order to drive growth. So is that investment going to be only by the public sector? Definitely not. You won't grow. You need the private sector to really bring in a lot of investment in order to drive growth. You also need to have the right kinds of the right environment, an environment that does not hobble the private sector or citizens so that they can do things and do things at low cost. Because the competitiveness side of productivity must kick in the way that you run the economy. So whether it's the policy measures, macroeconomic measures, monetary, fiscal, they need to work in a kind of complementarity that enables you to have a stable environment in which businesses and individuals can reasonably plan to do business. And then you need to, we would look at the issues of what technology can do to change even the course of the major contributions to economy. We know today that, that we have entered a new economic state in the world with the disruptive technologies. I don't know if people realize that even in Nigeria, we have the robotics and the artificial intelligence be driving some activities within the manufacturing sector. So how do we look at manufacturing sector contribution to the economy compared to services, compared to the shrinking contribution of oil and even agriculture? How do we move agriculture from low productivity contributor to high-end productivity in agriculture productivity as well as agribusiness, the value chain process. And, you know, so that whole program around the economy needs to be about structural change of the economy. Policy will guide it, institutions will direct it, investments in ways that private sector and public sector are working consistently, especially because today's fiscal pressure on the government will continue. It will only reverse when we begin to open up new opportunities that then enhance the revenue base of the country.
Okay, very quickly, I want to take you to, you know, first we're looking at the global environment first, you know, and how Nigeria sits with the Committee of Nations. You know, first we're seeing a more protectionist stance from some of the bigger economies around the world. And then we have issues around trade, you know, we have trade tensions here from US on one hand and China on the other hand. You know, we're seeing Europe in Europe, we're seeing the Brexit, we've seen Brexit on one hand and all that. You know, if you were, come 2019, you're in charge of the country, where would you advise Nigeria would lean more? Should we lean more towards the US, China, or would you say Europe?
Well, it's one of the greatest wonders of the world to see that China is more pro-trade than the U.S. and wonders shall never cease. But for us as Africans, in the African continent, we know that we need to be economically pragmatic in the way that we are organizing our economies. Trade is an essential part of development. You cannot get to development without trade. And so trading amongst ourselves, trading with the rest of the world, being open to innovation, to technologies, to ideas that would enable us be competitive players, if not within the rest of Africa, but at least within our own sub-region. That is important. We must do trade. We must facilitate trade. We must have an export orientation to enable us and the necessary foreign exchange that we need in order to create the environment for even more attraction of foreign direct investment into our economies. Embracing the trade concept, the idea that trade is key, means that our Africa policy needs to also show that we are leaders in ensuring economic integration of the continent, because it is valuable to us. So the Africa Free Trade Continental Treaty does not have to be something that anybody preaches to us about. It has to be something that we know is an important instrument. There are, of course, challenges that come with free trade, but there are ways to use policies to douse the disadvantages as much as possible. I believe that we as Nigeria, whether it's in terms of the market size of the continent, we stand in a good position to prepare ourselves to do even more. Because already you see Nigerian banks, Nigerian insurance firms, there are certain kinds of areas of business from Nigeria now. Look at our creative industry. Our creative industries are all over the continent. You know, we could do more. There's so much more that we could leverage if we understood our place on the continent. And then from there, we do a launch into the rest of the world.
All right, then. I would also like to know what your plans are or how you plan to work with the other arms of government. Because I know that it's not just a one-man show.
Of course.
You're definitely going to have to work with other people.
Yes, that's
so I would like to know how you plan to work with the executive,
Yes.
with the judiciary and the legislature.
I will be a president that is that inspires. I would inspire the rest of the arms of government to see how we collectively buy into a national vision that drives all of us. Because the truth is, there is no executive Nigeria and judiciary Nigeria. There is just Nigeria. And so the leader must mobilize and rally the citizens. It's not just the three arms of government. It's about getting the public endorsement and legitimacy for the kinds of reforms that you're going to need to do. Some of the reforms we're going to do will be politically, tough. And you must get the citizens to buy into it. You must persuade the rest of the country to buy into it, the rest of the arms of government. You must persuade the state level, the local government level, to buy into it. We are going to be on a Project Rescue Nigeria. It is not going to be a one-person show, because this is a clarion call for us to sort of reset Nigeria. We want to reset Nigeria. We want to say that those lost years of the locust, lost decades of the locust in our country that made us to pull behind while other countries went ahead. Countries like Singapore, look at China, look at countries like Malaysia and South Korea. The start-off point. Look at even Vietnam that went through what it went through. I mean, the start-off point was similar. And then suddenly we fell behind. We need to do a serious catch-up. This idea that we locked ourselves into the vortex of complacency with oil revenue, that's going to be over in my time.
All right, then. So we have to address the big gorilla in the room. A lot has been said about corruption in Nigeria. How is Obi going to address corruption in Nigeria?
Well, thank God for little messes. One of the areas of my focus intellectually and academically as well as professionally has been the issues of good governance. And so I'm one of the co-founders of Transparency International. So most of my professional life, I have been focused on this issue of getting countries to have transparency, to be accountable, to have accountable governments, to have systems that reduce opportunities for corruption. So number one is going to be how, building those kinds of systems. They would include some of the policy measures that we said. Look, sometimes just simply saying this responsibility does not belong to government. Shift it to the private sector that does it better, that has the incentive to drive it, that can see the risk and calculate the reward and be able to make a decision on how to do it more efficiently, more competitively, immediately frees you from the opportunities for corruption that happen in government.
I'd like to get your views on restructuring and what you plan to do.
So this conversation on restructuring is a very important one. The structural imbalance that we have is what's showing up. So you look at it, 2017 budget performance report by the administration shows that oil revenue is no longer sufficient to pay the personnel of government. How? Oil revenue, the entire oil revenue cannot pay some 2 million workers in government. So where is government going to pursue the agenda for development? That's why the government finds itself under pressure to keep borrowing, because there are important reforms that need to happen and there are structural issues. So the conversation around the restructuring for me is not simply going to be political conversation. It's an economic, the fundamental of it, the foundation of that conversation that I will lead the country to have is how is our economic configuration hobbling our capability to rise and grow into a dynamic, prosperous society.
Hopefully we'll get to speak to you again,
Yes.
as the elections take full shape. I've been speaking to Obiageli Ezekwesili, the presidential candidate of the Allied Congress Party of Nigeria. And that's all we have on today's show. As always, you can watch all episodes of Beyond Market on our website at cnbcafrica.com. Stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Market and follow me at Kenneth Igbomo. Do have a wonderful evening, and thanks for watching.